Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our Community Cats Power Hour. I'm Amy Charlton, Best Friends Digital Community Manager, and we have two community cat experts here with us today, Desiree and Destiny. We're so grateful for the time that they're taking to be here with all of us and all of you, and for you taking time out of your schedule to attend. We have a couple housekeeping things before we begin. If you look at the right-hand panel of your screen, you'll see towards the bottom, there's a question. Welcome to our Power Hour on Community Cats. We're so grateful for the two experts that we have here with us. From Best Friends, we have Desiree and Destiny, and we're so grateful for the time that they are taking to be here with us and for your time that you are taking to attend. I'm Amy Charlton. I'm Best Friends Digital Community Outreach Manager, and I'll cover a couple of housekeeping items to begin. On the right-hand panel, as you scroll down, you'll see a questions section. You can click on the arrow to maximize that and type your questions there, and we'll make sure that as those come up along the way, that we'll surface those for Destiny and Desiree so that they know that those questions are coming in and they can get those answered for you all throughout the presentation. There should also be some time there at the end that if there were any questions that weren't answered throughout, then we'll make sure that those get answered at the end as well. And we'll let Desiree and Destiny take it away.
Awesome, this is Desiree. Thank you everyone for being here. So today Destiny and I are going to go over how to determine if a shelter cat should be returned to field and what you should do if you see friendly cats in your community. So we will have quite a bit to cover today, so we'll definitely have some time at the end though for questions.
So hi everybody, I'm Destiny Haney. I'm the Community Cat Program Manager. I primarily oversee programs, our Community Cat programs in Southern California. I have a program in Riverside County as well as Bakersfield, California. And I've been doing cat rescue in Los Angeles, where I live, since about 2000. And I have to admit that I was not as progressive a rescuer as I could have been or should have been. And so we'll be discussing a little bit about that as we go along. I started working for Best Friends in about 2010, and I've done everything from being the helpline where everyone calls Best Friends asking, you know, this dog's at the shelter and it's going to be euthanized tomorrow, or my neighbor has 300 rats living in their apartment or something like that. I've done that. I established the Best Friends Kitten Nursery in Los Angeles. I've worked with the No Kill Los Angeles Coalition, and then moved into the community cat programs a few years ago, and really feel like that's where my heart is supposed to be. So I'm really excited to be a part of that team and really excited to share with you my journey and things that I've learned about community cats during that process.
Awesome, and this is Desiree again. I am the Community Cat Program Manager for Best Friends. I started with Best Friends in 2012 when we partnered with PetSmart Charities and the Albuquerque Animal Welfare Department for a 3-year pilot program that combined field TNR, shelter RTF, or return to field, and proactive community outreach. I've also overseen similar type programs in Las Vegas and in Tucson. You'll hear me refer to these programs as full scale. So those are our 3-year programs. They are pretty high volume. They tend to fix anywhere between 3,500 and 5,000 cats per year. And with those programs, we have our staff that are embedded into the shelter to oversee the projects. What I'm currently working on is what we're calling our mentorship grants. And those are similar to our full-scale 3-year programs, but these are actually only 1-year grants. They are still shelter-based programs, and we usually do about 6 to 10 per year, and we do those all around the country. So Destiny will be covering the community outreach component of these programs, and I'll just start by giving a quick overview of return to field programs and what eligibility looks like for those cats that enter the shelter. This is just a map to highlight the reach of these projects. If you look at the darker orange ones, those are 3-year grants, and the lighter orange is the mentorship projects. One of the things that I hear frequently when I'm traveling is that my community is different, or the residents here won't accept the cats being put back. But we've been able to successfully replicate this model in all different types of communities, and the shelters are able to show dramatic decreases in both euthanasia and intake, so it can definitely be done anywhere. Just a quick shout out to the Albuquerque program and some of the statistics that can come out of these programs. So again, the Best Friends portion of that program was from 2012 to 2015. Albuquerque Animal Welfare, it's New Mexico's largest municipal shelter. At the time, we were taking in about 25,000 dogs and cats per year. RTF, or return to field programs, are starting to become more common, but at the time, something of this scale was uncharted territory for us. But within 3 years, we fixed about 12,000 cats. Euthanasia went down 84%, and the intake of cats and kittens decreased by about 37%. And we've been able to maintain about a 90% live release rate for the last several years, so that's been super exciting to see the sustainability piece happen for this community. So if it can happen in New Mexico, again, it can happen anywhere. I always refer to return to field as game changer programs, because that's exactly what they are. They can quickly change the landscape not only for community cats, but they also benefit other shelter populations, such as dogs or neonate kittens, by freeing up space and resources at the shelter. All right, State of the Union. So here's where it's important to really know what the statistics are in your local shelter. And I understand that not everybody is a data person, but in order to be able to make the most impact, you really need to know who are the most vulnerable populations in your shelter. Nationally, we do have some estimates, but statistics can be hard to come by sometimes, and a lot of times rescuers are relying on old data. Most animals, so both dogs and cats that enter into the shelter, are what we would call strays, as opposed to an owner surrender. But as you can see from this chart, that shelter cats often fare worse than dogs. Overall, cats are struggling in shelters. Nationally, the dog stats are improving, but cats tend to regularly fall behind. And so why is that? The shelter system doesn't really do any favors for cats. And it's not for lack of trying, but it's often just that because cats are just not good candidates for the way that shelters work. Traditionally, we have tried to impose a dog model of sheltering on cats. Cats will get sick and they'll show up poorly in shelters, and leading to euthanasia for those reasons. One of the things I heard a lot in Albuquerque in 2012 was that we don't euthanize for space. But in reality, what we would do is we would hold them until they got sick. They would then spread that sickness to the other cats in the cattery, and then we would euthanize them for medical reasons. Kittens from unaltered community cats also come in because people think they have been abandoned. A lot of time they aren't abandoned, but they are brought into shelters, and the shelters just are not equipped to handle neonate kittens. And lastly, community cats don't have traditional kind of quote-unquote owners. And we'll find out when Destiny talks a little bit about the community piece, that they often do have more than one person in the neighborhood that's taking care of them. But these non-traditional owners may not go looking for cats in the shelter. All right, so just a little bit about how the return to field process works. So for intake, the cats will enter the shelter either by animal control officers or the general public. And then from there, a cat's eligibility is then determined. So for eligibility, the guidelines that we use would be a stray cat, so it's not lacking, or it doesn't have any sort of identifiable traceable microchip, no owner surrenders, and they're neither too young or too old, and that they're of healthy weight. One thing I should point out with eligibility is that temperament is not a criteria for our programs. It can depend on time of year and resources for the shelter, but I think it's super important to ask yourself, is that cat going to take an adoptable home for a cat that really needs it? So we really want to be able to save those adoptable homes for the owner surrenders or for the hoarding cases or for young kittens. It's not a hard and fast rule, so we do try to be flexible with what the shelter needs are, but we also want to be able to determine the best outcome for the individual animal. And a lot of, I think, the return to field process too is really seeing the big picture of what's going on in the shelter as opposed to one individual cat. So from there, the eligible cats are sterilized, vaccinated, and returned to their outdoor homes. And by outdoor homes, the exact location from where they came from. And we consider those cats the red flag cats. And what the red flag cat means is we assume that he's got friends and family nearby, he knows other cats in the neighborhood, and that's where the outreach piece really comes in. So we want to go out into the neighborhoods, hang some door hangers, really start talking to people in that neighborhood, find out where the cats are living, and then TNR all the community cats in and around that area. This part of the program I feel is really, really critical to seeing that intake reduction. One of the things that we found with the Albuquerque program is that about 2 to 6 times as many cats were brought in through this kind of field work as opposed to intake. And then also to the extra piece of the community outreach is really on mitigating any nuisance issues. So that really takes a lot of collaboration, not just among the community cat program staff, but also the ACOs and the shelter staff as well. All right, so a little bit more on determining eligibility and how we would determine what a positive outcome would be for a cat. Traditionally, our mindset has really been that adoption is the best outcome, but it's not the only option. And I would actually say that return to field is a better option in many cases. So for example, especially during summer, those cute fluffy kittens even have trouble getting out of the shelter. So if those guys are having trouble getting adopted, what about, the shy cat or the old tame tom who doesn't quite use the litter box like he should, or even the average tame cat who's just sitting in the shelter? Those cats don't have as much of an option. Data tells us that owners aren't finding their cats at the shelter and that we have to look for other outcomes for these cats. So both return to field programs and the TNR programs, they're just not for ferals anymore. I think when we started the program in Albuquerque in 2012, we were very, very focused initially on ferals, but it makes sense to expand that eligibility. Friendly cats can be returned to field as well. They have a home to go back to. Somebody in that neighborhood made them friendly. And so we need to start looking at the community as their homes. Lost pet cats have a better chance of finding their way home if they're left where they are instead of being brought back into the shelter.
So this is Destiny again. This quote I really love by Mandela: "May your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears." I think that it really sums up how so many of us in rescue and shelter workers and volunteers and, myself included, have made decisions in the past based on this. All of us have seen and hopefully moved past the, those old adoption questionnaires that were just pages and pages of questions written in. And those questions were put in because we tried to imagine the absolute worst thing that could happen to an animal. And sometimes we were creating barriers for those animals to find a perfectly good home based on these fears that we had. I was this way. I was completely 100%, difficult when it came to finding adopters for the animals when I worked in other rescues in Los Angeles. And I always tell people, like, good luck trying to adopt an animal from me back in the day. And it was really a shame because I know that there were a lot of animals that were in the shelter who weren't finding homes and weren't coming to our rescue because I was holding on to animals that really didn't need to be sitting in a foster home or a sanctuary. We humans want to have some sort of control over the future of that animal, which is understandable. But in reality, there are so very few guarantees for anything in life, and it's something that we have to learn to accept when we're dealing with animals. Animals that go into shelters, I hear a lot of times with friendly cats, well, if he goes back into a neighborhood, he might get hit by a car or something like that. But the truth is, if he's in a shelter, when he gets adopted, if he gets adopted, there's no guarantee that he's going to be an indoor cat, which means that he has that same risk of going anywhere. So it's about kind of weighing the risks and the positive outcomes. There is one guarantee, though, that currently most of the cats going into a shelter aren't having a live outcome. So we need to look at how we can change our own actions to help remedy that, to find more positive outcomes for cats. So similar to this quote, the rescue world has been basing so many of our decisions on fears that we have of what might happen and not what we really hope will happen for these animals. So if you go to the next slide, we as progressive animal people need to make the switch from thinking of friendly outdoor cats as unloved or fending for themselves, or for so many other reasons that we use to justify needing to rescue these animals. And I put rescues in quotes as well, right? Rescuing them from whatever we feel like we're rescuing them from. Becoming comfortable with knowing that there are many, many friendly cats and not friendly cats living in neighborhoods who belong directly in that community, that they don't know that their neighborhood is, you know, not their home, or that their home is unconventional from our point of view. They don't know how they're supposed to live in any other way. They don't know that they're missing out on, you know, a fluffy bed or whatever. It's just the home that they've always known. And we need to start being okay with that and make the best decision for each cat, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable at first. And I can say I was definitely uncomfortable at first. So just know that growing pains are a good thing, I think. So this is my favorite cat. I love this cat. He was part of a project that I was not a part of, but I wish I was, because I would have liked to have met him. But you're probably wondering a little bit about, what am I talking about? I'll admit I was almost a philosophy major in college, but there's an almost there, and that wasn't the case. So what I really want everybody to do is to think hard about this. Are your resources going to cats who truly need help, or cats that would have been fine staying where they were and just given some resources such as spay and neuter and vaccinations? The facts are that no organization, whether you're a small organization, whether you're a big organization like Best Friends, there's just never enough resources to do everything that we want to do. There's not enough fosters and volunteers and cage space and money, and definitely not enough time to do everything. So we really have to pick our battles. By trying to be progressive, we have to be responsible and decide where we can make the most impact with the resources that we have. So this kid, I wish I knew his name, but I don't. I love this guy. So he seems pretty happy to me if you take a look at him, right? He looks like he's ear-tipped. He might even be ear-tipped twice, kind of hard to tell. But he doesn't seem to be missing any meals. He's probably got like 3 or 4 feeders dropping off food every day because, you know, I think Desiree mentioned there's not ever just one person that's feeding the animals in the neighborhood. So if it was between rescuing this cat from the street or a cat that's sitting in a shelter on a euthanasia list, really think about who do you choose to use your resources on. And hopefully most of us would say that it's the shelter cat, right? Seems easy. This guy looks like he's doing okay. And there's a cat that's currently sitting on a euthanasia list. But let's say that you don't have any cats dying in your shelter today. Would that change your answer on what you do with this cat? If your answer is yes, then I would challenge you to ask yourself why. Why does this cat, who seems perfectly happy and healthy, need to be rescued if his other needs have already been met, such as spay and neuter. The truth is that cats find their ways to shelters in many different ways. A lot of times people think it's just a grumpy neighbor who picks up a cat and takes it to the shelter, or it's animal control coming out and being scary and taking animals to the shelter. But it also shows that sometimes it's a good Samaritan who has either not been doing anything about TNR in their neighborhood and the cats are creating more and more nuisance issues, or someone who has been doing TNR, but they still have a lot of cats in the neighborhood, and the person who's been feeding the cats doesn't necessarily know what to do about the cats that are there. So even in the best situation, cats can find themselves in the shelter. And our hope is that the cats who do end up in the shelter would get to go back to their colony, but if they truly can't be returned for some reason, and I would say there's few reasons why they can't be returned, but if they really can't be returned, then those are the cats that we should be focusing on rescuing, not going out and finding that fat orange cat who talks to everybody and think that we need to somehow save him from the life that he's been living. So Desiree mentioned positive outcomes, and as she said, you know, the traditional positive outcomes we think of are adoption and transfers. Those are obviously the outcome that most of us think of. Return to owner rates for cats are something that I hear a lot about too, but you can see that nationally it's between 2 and 5%, sometimes actually even less than 2% of cats that are actually going back to their owners. And you have to wonder, why is that, especially when dogs are going back to their owners at a 16 to 17% rate. And there are a few reasons that we can think of. Desiree mentioned that there are not really specific owners that are coming to a shelter to look for their feral cat or even a litter of newborn kittens. We hear a lot of people say, well, I assumed the cat had been killed. In Los Angeles, we hear a lot about, we assume it was killed by a coyote or it got hit by a car or something like that, or that the litter of kittens died. They never go looking for the cat because they don't even know where they would go looking for that cat. And then lost pets who have indoor outdoor access aren't looked for as quickly as dogs or even indoor only cats that get out. So we have a lot of cats who will get out and someone will say, well, he's always been, you know, he's gone away before for a week, but he always came back. But by the time they realize that the cat has truly gone and it hasn't come back, they may go to the shelter looking, but typically at that point, if it's been over a week, that cat's not at the shelter anymore. And the neonate kittens are a huge contributing factor to shelter numbers, especially during kitten season. And they can just as easily come from an unaltered indoor cat who got out that one time as coming from a feral colony that somebody's feeding. But if you look at these outcomes, it shows that there are still 75% of cats coming into shelters who don't have that traditional positive outcome of adoption, return to owner, transfer for adoption, which means that we need to have some kind of alternative outcome. So community cat programs are definitely working to save those cats in the shelter that didn't typically have a positive outcome. And as Desiree said, adoption's not the only option. And for a lot of cats, it's really not the best option. There are so many cute and fluffy, friendly kittens that have trouble finding adopters. If any of us have worked in shelters, you know that. You see really cute kittens that just continually get passed up. But few people are looking for that feral cat or that old tom cat who never used a litter box in his life, or even just your average cute cat who's tame, who's sitting there in a shelter, suddenly looking sad or stressed out and getting sick. So again, we want to use those resources to focus on the little fluffy kitten who couldn't go home. So if cats aren't getting reclaimed and they're not getting adoptions, then we want to look at the return to field. And as Desiree said, it's not just ferals. And it's interesting, again, that a lot of times the friendly outdoor cat are the ones that we get the most resistance to when we talk about putting them back where they came from. And I know someone here is definitely thinking about that, that truly lost cat, the indoor only cat who happened to get out and took off for a week. So if you look at the next slide, it has this really neat study about lost cats. It shows you that cats are 13 times more likely to be reunited with their owner by non-shelter means. 66% of cats find their own way home. So cats are much better off being left where they are instead of actually even being brought into a shelter. How does this happen? As we mentioned, a lot of cats have access to going outdoors and people don't go looking for them in time. And then you also hear people, that if the cats are left by themselves, we have a lot of people who say like, oh yeah, he's been gone for a week and then he just wandered in one day. Or he ends up at a neighbor down the street who posts some signs or posts on Facebook. There's a lot of really great, Facebook pages and Nextdoor apps and things like that that people post animals on. So they have a better chance of finding their way home if they actually stay within the community that they were originally from. I had this cat in our Los Angeles program a few years ago that we trapped during a TNR project, and he had a microchip. And so we contacted the microchip company, and the woman was really upset because she said that she used to curse microchips because she'd paid for this microchip and the cat had been missing for 9 years and no one had ever called her. And it turns out that he actually lived just a couple of houses away from her where we had been trapping. So he had rehomed himself a few houses down and had been living there for 9 years, and no one had known that this cat was microchipped, but he was perfectly healthy and happy. He just happened to wander in a trap while we were trapping in the area. So again, these cats, we think that they, wander away and die, but more often than not, I think they are actually finding homes in the areas, whatever that home may be, whether it's an indoor home or whether it's, some sort of a colony. And I know it seems weird to think about leaving a cat outside, but instinctually we know this, right? Cats have different rules than dogs. For example, if I see a dog running down the street in most cities and towns, that's a big red flag, right? If I see them, I'm like, where's the person for this dog? Do they have a leash on? Is there a gate open? I always think about those things when I see a dog. But whenever I see a cat in an alley or a yard, it's pretty normal. And I go, hey cat, and just move along. It's just something that we do. So we know that it's normal for cats to be outside. And again, as long as they're not looking like they're injured or ill, there's really no reason that we need to feel like swooping in and taking them away from the community that they've been living in. So I want you to ask yourself, what are you as a rescuer or a shelter worker or a volunteer doing to hinder life saving? And I know it's not easy to ask because I have been there. I had to take a really hard look at myself, and it's hard to say that there were so many animals that I could have saved and I didn't because I was very hung up on this one cat, or going into this neighborhood and seeing a cat and thinking, oh, you're going to come home with me and I'll find you a good home because nobody here loves you, which is not actually the case. As animal people, we feel really deep empathy and concern for the well-being of animals, which is a good thing. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't. But what's difficult for most of us to come to terms with is when we really get deep down and dirty with ourselves, is that sometimes especially when it comes to free roaming cats, they don't need our help. Again, aside from spay and neuter, that's really all we really need to be offering them on a regular basis. So when you start thinking about cats that you see in a community, think about, am I really helping this cat? Is this a really lost cat or a cat who's truly in danger? Or is this actually where he lives? What resources will I need for this cat? Do I have them? Does this cat really need those resources? Again, spay and neuter are always the most important thing. And aside from that, is there really anything that they need? And am I making a judgment about the caretaker without actually meeting that caretaker? Again, I don't know how many times I've thought to myself, someone must not love you, right? Because you're dirty or, whatever, you're out here alone, you're really friendly, you must want to be inside somebody's home. But I always tell people, if it's a friendly cat, it didn't get friendly on its own. It's probably got a lot of people it's being friendly to. So those are the cats that I don't really worry about. And then also think about how many other cats that don't have the option of getting out of the shelter will die because you choose this cat right now. And if you choose this cat and run out of resources, like your foster ends up with 20 cats and they move out of town and suddenly you have all of these cats that you have to take back from them, have you done right by this cat who was perfectly fine where you got him? And why might staying in his neighborhood be what's best for that cat? A lot of times we label neighborhoods and people just in general in our lives, right? I hear a lot of, oh, that's a sketchy neighborhood, or even that crazy cat lady stereotype that we often use. We use the label of community cat or friendly cat or feral cat, loosely owned, like whatever you want to call them. All of these types of cats, in most cases, if you take the time to talk to people, you'll find out that these types of cats are loved and cared for by someone in that potentially sketchy neighborhood, or even a not sketchy neighborhood. And it's important to remember that these types of cats are part of that community because they're in that community. And location or economic makeup of a community doesn't dictate the value of that cat or the value placed on the cat by the community. I personally live in what some people might consider a bad neighborhood in Los Angeles, and I've seen a lot of people in the rescue community assume that my neighbors don't value the cats and dogs simply because of the neighborhood that I'm in. I have this program in the Coachella Valley, and this mobile home park was me having to check myself again, right? We always have to continue to check ourselves. So I do this presentation a lot, and then I encountered this mobile home park, and I was out trapping in the Coachella Valley right before we started that program, and a volunteer had given me the information about this colony that she had been feeding. And she specifically told me, don't go in the mobile home park, and pretty much told me that my life was in danger if I went in there because it was such high crime, and that they hated the cats, and if they knew I was there to do anything with the cats, that it would be even worse. So she was feeding them across the alley by an auto shop, and we were continually getting complaints from the auto shop because the cats were climbing on the cars and they were defecating, outside the property, and there was trash left from the people who were feeding. So my staff person decided to go into this mobile home park one afternoon and door hang. And she found this community who really liked the cats. They were so poor that they couldn't even afford to fix the doors on the mobile home park. So that first picture there is actually plywood against a door that the door is no longer there. But you'll see the little orange thing in the corner is actually our door hanger that's on a nail. And you'll see the two cats sleeping there, just not caring. They don't care that this mobile home park is something that most of us would never want to live in. And then the second picture is when we came trapping. It's those same two cats following my staff around while they were out trapping. And then the last picture was this little boy who lives in the community who was so happy to see his cat come back. So that brown and white tabby that he's petting is the same tabby from the other two pictures. And he was so excited to see them. And I think it's really important to think about if we had just gone with our initial instinct, the first information that we were told was to not even go in there, that we wouldn't have necessarily been able to affect this community. These cats weren't mistreated, they were getting food. And just by taking the time to go in there, we were also able to solve the nuisance complaint that animal control kept hearing about at the auto body shop. We found out we didn't need to have people feeding across the alley at the auto shop. They could just come into the mobile home park and feed, or provide the food if they wanted to the community, because the community was already feeding those cats. Years ago, I probably would have felt like I needed to take this cat and put him into a home because he was so friendly. But now I hate to think what message I would have sent to this young boy if I had decided that he didn't deserve to have his cat back because it made him so happy to see him. And then it's also really important to remember that cats actually have a community too. And it's a fact that we often overlook, not only that the people in the community care about the cats, but also the other cats care about the cats. I know a lot of people think cats are solitary, right? But we know that they're not a pack of dogs. Dogs are pack animals. They like to get together and do things. But cats do form strong social bonds to other cats. And it's important to consider that the friendly outdoor cat may be extremely close to another outdoor cat, and removing one of them unnecessarily could impact that friend. And you could also be disrupting a hierarchy. If you remove a cat from a community that's kind of keeping that colony stable, then you destabilize it, and it can cause other cats to be coming into the community. It's similar to that vacuum effect that we hear about, but we just don't think about it when it comes to the friendlies. We think that we're doing them a favor bringing them out, but really TNR should be the primary way that we're helping them. So I just want everybody to keep thinking about that when you're in communities, because there are so many cats that are out there who I think we do a disservice to by bringing them into the shelter and not just working with them within the community and building those community relationships, because that's how we're really going to get further. Then take your resources if you have fosters or adopters or, you know, extra ability to help cats that are in the shelter, because those are the ones who really don't have any other options.
This is Desiree again. If you are looking for more resources, I just thought I would direct you to our Community Cat Programs Handbook. It's our kind of soup to nuts, how to start these programs, how to run these programs. It's got all kinds of resources, anything from budgets to hiring, to how to deal with complaint calls and how to work within the shelter. So, you know, definitely take a look at this online resource if you're involved with these programs. And also wanted to give both my and Destiny's contact information. If you've got more questions after the webinar, we are available, again, if you have questions. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Destiny and Desiree. What a compelling story it is to hear from your perspective how you've evolved in the journey that you've been on. We appreciate you so much. I want to make sure that all of your questions get answered, and we have one or a couple that did come in now. So we have one about asking if you wouldn't mind talking a bit about reasons for returning kittens and when you would and wouldn't return kittens.
Desiree, do you want to take that?
Sure, I can start. So I'm just looking at the question. So reasons where we would and wouldn't return kittens I think there's two answers to that question, or I guess two perspectives in terms of returning kittens, whether you're in the field, and then the other option would be if you're coming from a shelter perspective. So from the shelter, for our eligibility criteria, we generally do 4 months and up without a known caregiver. If we do have kittens that come in, a lot of times like kind of end of summer, we'll have some that are just a little bit younger than that are kind of hissy spitty kittens. And then it becomes, like Destiny talked a lot about resources, and it becomes a resource for what do you do with these kittens. So that's when the community outreach piece comes in, and our staff will go out into the neighborhood, locate the caregiver at that point, and go ahead and see if they'd be willing to take the kittens back, if they'll reunite them with mom. In our Las Vegas program, they've actually been really, really successful with doing that. And it's just going out in the community and having those discussions. I know Destiny had mentioned that when cats are coming in over the counter, a lot of times we have this assumption that it's somebody who's kind of grumpy about the cats or who doesn't, you know, want the cats in the neighborhood. But when we're actually out in the community and having these discussions, we're actually finding that a lot of times that's not the case. It could just be a good Samaritan who just are like, oh, I'm going to bring these cats in for adoption to the shelter. They would love these kittens, and not necessarily understanding how strained for resources the shelter is at that point. And I think on the flip side, when you're just doing the field TNR and the field piece, I always advocate to always put those kittens back whenever possible. For a couple of reasons. I think the big one, again, is resource dependent. Are you taking an adoptable home from a cat that really needs it? So those kittens can stay in that community, you can fix them, get everybody fixed, get that colony stabilized and put them back. So even in that instance, I would go ahead and recommend putting them back.
Thank you, thank you. We do have another question. If you have any tips for getting shelter staff or county officials on board for RTF? I know that's kind of a big one, but.
This is Desiree again. I can take that one. It certainly can be difficult. I think the advantage for shelters now versus what we had in 2012 in Albuquerque is that there's so many communities that are out there that are doing this. We've got some really solid data to really show why these programs are effective. So it's kind of it's almost that peer pressure in some ways, and being able to say like, well, you know, this community next door is doing this, similar environment, similar like socioeconomic status, like, you know, why isn't this community doing it? So I feel like sometimes that community pressure does certainly help in getting these programs started. The Albuquerque chart that I put up at the beginning of the presentation, that was actually one of our coworkers, Peter Wolf, co-authored a paper on the Albuquerque project that was just published in April, and I think that has some really good statistics that you can use as to proving their effectiveness at the shelter level. The Community CAT program handbook also has some really good kind of starting points as to where to go with these. And I think for even just kind of starting those relationships and building with the shelter, I mean, it's super important to go in with that non-judgmental attitude. And I think, you know, both myself and Destiny are certainly happy to guide someone through that process if they're just starting a return to field program in their community.
And I'll add to that also that we do have a video that we just recently finished where it's animal control officers and animal shelter directors talking about community or the RTF programs that they've been doing at their shelters. So that might be something to share with them as well. And then also, I'm sure that some of our shelter directors that we've been working with would be happy to talk with other shelter directors if someone was interested in doing that. So there's always that option as well if places are interested in hearing how other directors have come to the conclusion that these were the programs they wanted to do.
Awesome, that's helpful. Yes, if you don't mind getting us that specific video you refer to, we can make sure to include it in the resource document that we send after this particular session.
Absolutely.
So, thank you. So we have another question come in about how to succinctly sell the program to the community. So like those people / caregivers who are skeptical.
Destiny, would you like that one?
I don't know that I'm the succinct person, but I think that, again, providing them with the resources or providing them with the information, but also in the community, it depends if you're dealing with the community where the cats are already there. If that's the community that you're working with, a lot of times just going in and talking to them about the program is enough. If it's someone who doesn't like the program, we often find that it's a lot more social work than animal work when you go into the community. And sometimes it's neighbors that are just angry with neighbors about something that has nothing to do with the cats. So really finding out what their issues are first and then tailoring a response to that. If it's a community that just feels like Desiree was saying, you know, our community is different and this is never going to work, I would just say, well, why don't we try a pilot program and see how that goes? And a lot of times just having that word pilot in the conversation, if you're talking about like the municipal shelters, that's enough to sell most of them, because a lot of them like that the pilot, they don't feel obligated to continue it. But once they start these programs, the pilot usually just keeps going. So that might be a good way to work with the different areas of it.
And I think I'll mention too, I think when you're out in the community, I think so much of dealing with complaints is just listening. You know, Destiny mentioned that it's not always about cat problems, and I did find that to be the case, where a lot of times the cat was the low-hanging fruit. So it was really a neighbor dispute, or a lot of times it was a marital dispute, and there was so many other issues that were going on that it wasn't just about the cats, but the cats were easy to pinpoint. But I think, you know, I've certainly been, I've dealt with nuisance calls where, you know, I think it's just listening to them and finding out that, you know, they're frustrated and they've been dealing with these cats for years. So, and then I think it's just getting that information out from them and finding out, okay, well, you know, you've been dealing with this cat problem for 5 or 6 or 7 years. This isn't going to fix it overnight, but let's go ahead and start the process. And I think a lot of people are really receptive to that because they've been frustrated for the nuisance issues for so many years, and no one has really proactively done anything to take care of the problem. So I think when you go out and you're in the community and you're non-judgmental and you're really offering solutions to people, I think people really gravitate towards that. And I think it makes the discussion a lot easier to have. We also do, for our programs, we do really encourage the use of humane deterrence. And I think those are a really, really great tool to have in your toolbox, to be able to offer to people that once the cats are fixed, let's set up some different types of humane deterrence in their yard, to help from, keep the cats out. And that seems to work pretty well as well.
And it's about managing expectations too. If you have someone who really just does not like the cats, if they're expecting to never see a cat in their yard ever again, that's not something that you're going to be able to provide them, even if what they're wanting, which is probably you just rounding up the cats and taking them away, that's still not going to solve their problem. So really managing their expectations from the beginning, and also just being okay with letting them kind of yell at you for a while, because sometimes they just really do need to vent and get it out. And then a lot of times people will back up after they've done that. And if you're able to kind of weather that storm, you can get a lot further with them. If you immediately start like yelling back or walking away or any of that, you'll stop that conversation and they won't be able to process through their conflict.
And I think too, so much of it is also remembering, I think for that one kind of grumpy person that you get in the neighborhood, it's also seeing that bigger picture of what's going on in the neighborhood, that there's, 4 or 5 or 6 people in the neighborhood that love that cat. So it's not just a neighborhood full of complainants. There's people that are out there that are actively taking care of them and love these cats and have names for them and know all of their personalities and quirks. And we really want to be able to respect that as well and honor that. So, and I think it's just seeing that bigger picture, and also using those people that are caring for the cats to help co-create those solutions in the neighborhood as well.
Ooh, I like that, the co-create concept. Sounds like you guys, your philosophy degree is coming in really handy, and the working with people, maybe a psychology degree, I don't know. We do have one more question about how to work with volunteers who maybe aren't comfortable with returning friendlies or kittens.
I think there's a couple of options that you can do. If you are doing a return to field program, or TNR, is having that volunteer go with you into the community. And a lot of times, again, we've built up these fears about an area, and sometimes just going there and meeting the people and realizing that it's not what we thought it was, and that there are people that actually care for the animals, then that can in some cases be enough to sway them to being comfortable with putting friendlies and kittens back out. I mean, it's never easy if you're putting a friendly kitten or a friendly cat back out and it's like following you back to the car, talking to you. But doing the work in the neighborhood and making sure that you've covered your bases and that there is somebody that cares about this cat in that area will go a long way to making people feel more comfortable with it.
And I think also too, you want to make sure that you're putting the correct volunteer in the correct position. And being able to put them in job descriptions where they're comfortable and their skills are most being used. We have a pretty robust return to field volunteer program in our Las Vegas shelter, and we do have some volunteers that just return the truly feral ones because they have a hard time returning the friendlies. And I think that's fine. I mean, I think they're wonderful volunteers, and they're absolutely helping us with the mission in Las Vegas, but we're not going to expect at least those volunteers to return the friendly cats, but we have other volunteers that are on board with that. So I think it's also just judging where they're comfortable. Some volunteers are more comfortable doing complaint calls or maybe doing stuff inside. Other volunteers want to work in the shelter. So I think it's really making sure that you are kind of vetting your volunteers and seeing where the best places for them to volunteer are.
Love it. Thank you so much. I recently had a neighbor who came to me and said, there's kitties, lots of them. I mean, lots of them to them were about 5. And I don't think they knew whether they were being fed or whether they should take them into a shelter or to a rescue. So do we have resources that we can share when someone in the public or a friend or a neighbor comes to us and says, I can see that there's kitties loose. I can kind of tell they don't have an owner, but I don't really know for sure what to do. Do we have something we can give them to sort of assess to make the best decision about what to do with those cute kitties?
We do have a kitten form for the people who find litters of kittens that they feel have been abandoned, because 9 times out of 10 they actually haven't, and we don't want them coming into the shelter. So we do have that. Desiree, I don't know of one off the top of my head that would cover for adult cats. My feeling is always if they seem happy and healthy, if they don't seem extremely stressed, like you can tell a cat who's been, the owner moved and left it outside, it tends to be a little stressed and not moving around and exploring and typically not chatting and having a good time. So you can kind of identify those cats. But again, if they seem happy and healthy otherwise, I would assume that they probably have somebody nearby that's claiming them as either their community cat or their outdoor cat.
I agree. For me, as long as he looks healthy, I'm going to assume he has a caretaker. I don't necessarily have to know who that person is. If I do see a cat running in the neighborhood, I do always check for an ear tip. I think I probably look for that more than anything else. But I think it's always just kind of, if they're healthy, just leave them where they are, and then see what resources exist in the community to get them TNR'd.
Okay, cool. Thank you. As far as I can tell, we haven't had any additional final questions come in. So I just want to make that last call for anyone else on the line right now that might have a question that hasn't asked them yet. We encourage you to send those in. Don't be shy. While we're waiting to see if any additional questions come in, I just want to remind those of you on the call, because you took the time to register and attend today, you're automatically going to be on a list where we will send a follow-up email to you. It typically goes out the next day after this recording, and it will include a variety of things. It will include a recording of this live event, including the question and answer portion of it. It will also include the actual PowerPoint slides that you've seen here on the screen, so you have the physical PowerPoints in your hands. And we have some additional resources. So basically, we make you a one-pager that includes links to all of those things that I just mentioned and any additional resources that we feel like would be handy for you in the context of this same topic. And so we just want to make sure you know that you will be getting those directly from attending and registering for these events. Next month, we are doing a planned Giving Power Hour. We always do them on the third Thursdays at 11 a.m. So look for those to come out in our newsletter and in the digital community. Those are the main places that we are advertising these, and we encourage you to continue to go on this journey with us, to just take this quick hour to have access to experts on important topics, to help you get inspired to try some new things and learn from them and be able to ask them questions. And in the last couple of minutes, I wanted to give Marla Brown just a few minutes. She says she even has a quick funny story that she can share to wrap things up. I'm trying to unmute you though, Marla. You'll probably have to mute. There you go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to share this cute little tidbit that tomorrow, October 19th, is the anniversary of a famous cat named Mirka. This cat was banished 400 miles from Moscow for eating 2 canaries. This was in 1989, and returned 1 year later to the same spot from where he was originally banished.
Oh my gosh.
They find the way home, guys.
What a whole year.
He didn't go through a shelter, and he found his own way home. And it took a year, but it was 400 miles, and he was still fine. So yay to Mirka.
Yes.
I think it would take me longer than a year to get that far. But
yeah, on foot.
Me too.
Especially if I was taken where I didn't know I was. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Without GPS.
Right, or yourself.
And speaking of dates, for those of you that might not know, Best Friends celebrates Community Cat Day on October 20th. So kind of look for tidbits of information that come out about that. And then in the digital community, we chose Community Cats as our theme for the month of October. And so every Tuesday, we'll post a question in the community throughout the entire month of October. We've already done a few of those that are conversation starters around the theme for the month. And so because it's Community Cats, we've had some great conversation starters already, and we have more to come. So we would love for you to check those out in the digital community every Tuesday and join in the conversation and look at those who are also sharing, because there's been some great things come from just people sharing what their experience and journey has been in this particular area and on particular topics that are kind of hot topics in the community cat realm. So as far as that goes, any other questions? Last call before we call it a wrap. Okay. Thank you again so much, Destiny and Desiree. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your journey. And I love all of the stories and the inspirational quotes. I think that's really helpful as we move through trying to help create change. We're thankful for you on the call and hope that you'll continue to join us for these monthly power hours. Thanks again and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.